Hello everyone. So today I've been gonna do my presentation on IQ testing. So one of the things I wanted to search about it is how much does IQ testing matters? Because I think like IQ testing is something that a lot of schools like care a lot about and teachers as well. So I was thinking maybe we should like look into this. How legitimate is IQ testing in order to like say whether a student will be able to perform better than other students or whether a student will have good academic outcomes in the future. But of course there's some bias on this. People saying that well IQ testing is not all about intelligence. There's a lot of things that contributes to intelligence or wisdom or whatever you want to call it, which is part of cognitive intelligence, you will say. So, one of my arguments is IQ testing does not test everything. So, the concept of intelligence should signify skills in reasoning, problem solving, critical thinking, and adaptation to the environment. Although this notion appears logical, it breaks down when one carefully examines the context of IQ testing. IQ test is not culture free. So this is one of the things that I was saying that IQ testing is n- not culture free. So you need some kind of reasoning in order to know what you're confronting when taking an IQ test. Obviously, there's gonna be a difference between people who know what IQ test versus people who doesn't know what an IQ test. Someone who knows what an IQ test is will have a very better way to understand what they should do when taking the test versus people who doesn't have any knowledge of what an IQ tests. So it is not languagely free because it requires knowledge, especially of English. If your main language is not English, then most likely you're gonna have trouble taking the IQ tests. So IQ tests are based on the notion that scores do not represent a single entity but are a composite of many skills. So that's one of the things that Gunderson and one of the things that the paper was talking about is that well IQ testing may involve other kind of skills that not necessarily are useful on everything that we might be confronted in school. It is argued that IQ tests are needed to measure the potential of an individual. This argument implies that there is some measure that can reliably predict how much an individual can learn and what can be expected of him or her. In this view, IQ scores predict the limits of academic performance. So let's go to the next slide. So one of the papers I was reading is that most of it what matters is personality. So something I have written here is IQ, grades, and scores on achievement tests are widely used as measures of cognition. However, correlations among them are far from perfect. One study found that reading disabled children with lower IQ scores made more gains than reading disabled children with higher scores. So this is one example that okay, so we have a group of children who have low IQ scores. It shows that they can show some improvement on reading scores versus other students who have high IQ scores can show as well that they're not really good at reading or having a good performance on reading. So that's one of the examples that we have here. It is clear that IQ tests have been used to discover disabilities in students, but in this article argues that IQ tests are inappropriate for identifying disabilities. So one of the things that this paper also addresses is that many of these entities have tried to use IQ tests in order to identify who is disabled and who isn't. But let's remind ourselves that people whose main language is not English will not perform very well. Therefore, they will be categorized as disabled, which is of course not true. There is a belief that IQ tests are language free, but unfortunately, intelligence tests are not language free. Again, that goes back again to the same reading. Those who have a lack of knowledge on the language in this test, they are taking will eventually be classified as disabled. And again, it's the same thing. So let's go to the next slide. Grades and achievement tests are more predictive of life outcomes because they capture aspects of personality that have independent predictive power. So something else that this paper was addressing is that grades and achievement tests can show some better predicament of whether our student is good academically or not, but nonetheless, we should not let grades and achievement tests to be the only thing that decides whether a student is going to be able to perform well or not. So, IQ tests can help in some way or another for some of that, identify whether a student belongs into a certain level, but it's not all that matters. So measures of personality predict achievement test scores and grades above and beyond IQ scores. Personality traits also affect the acquisition of knowledge. Better motivated people learn more. Again, so personality matters. Why? Because as it says right here, better motivated people learn more. If people are not motivated, they're not gonna learn. So part of it depends on personality. So I have other views of IQ testing. So we can see that the survey does suggest that a majority of school psychologists have not discontinued using profile analysis to interpret refer students' performance on the WISC-3. So this is something that school psychologists have used um, in order to see students um, to identify some of the traits on students. So part of it, they use IQ testing on those students in order to, you could say, label them. The survey also indicates that a substantial number of practitioners share concerns about the usefulness of the WISC-3 to generate instructional strategies or help design psycho-educational interventions or for biennial or triennial evaluations. So we see that how some of them have concerns about the usefulness of this, and a significant number of practitioners raise concerns about the appropriate use of the Wechsler with minority group students, children from rural communities or where English is not the primary language spoken in the home. So again, here it shows that IQ testing has some limitations because even them, they can agree that those who belong to rural communities or are part of group minority students are gonna have some trouble on this IQ testing. Therefore, it's gonna lead to some bias and, well, as we know it, leading to some inequity in schools. In terms of education policy, the promotion performance measures and ILSAS is often explained in terms of the rise and expansion of the neoliberal thought collective. In other words, testing constitutes a core component of neoliberal education reform. The promotion of testing practices was aided by the incessant critique from the business world and public sector departments, claiming that children did not learn enough. So part of here, we can see a little bit that part of the IQ testing is in order to know like whether a student is going to be able to perform well or not. And it's kind of related to more deeper stuff like the public welfare or the welfare state. It's trying to focus in the way that, well, if we're investing in schools, then we should have at least some way to say, oh, So these students are gonna perform better than others. So therefore, we should invest. So that way, if we invest in schools and in the young people, that we're gonna have something in return for the benefit of the community and the city. So that's one of the things that I was reading in this article, and it shows that there's some entities out there that are deeply concerned about these issues. So standard testing. So one something that this I took it out from the book. So another practice that impedes equity in schools is the uncritical use of standardized testing, originally designed a century ago to help identify children who were labeled mentally retarded. The use of standardized tests expanded greatly afterward, influenced by a tremendous influx of new immigrants into the country. So some of my solutions here is it is clear that IQ testing can be biased when getting results, so it is important to test students in many different ways. Grades, tests, reading IQ, and so on. So here my solution is that we should not rely on one way of testing. Otherwise, we should see how these students perform in many different ways in order to decide, oh, this student is performing well, this student will have success, this student is in a good position. And if we see a student who's having some of these problems with grades, tests, reading, IQ, and so on, then is we should put more effort into helping those students. So especially those whose main language is not English, because we don't want to let our biases to decide, oh, you know, he is mentally retarded, he is not, he's disabled. But we should keep in mind that maybe his main language is not English, therefore has led to some of these results, or his culture or her culture is different. So let teachers have more training on seeing whether a student has some kind of disability or not by testing students in different environments. So that's everything. Thank you so much.